For 5 years, I begged you to notice me. Tonight, I'm done begging.
You're really leaving? You only see me when I'm walking away.
I thought you'd always stay.
That was your mistake.
She didn't slam doors. She didn't scream. She didn't throw a single thing at the man who had broken her heart. She simply folded the divorce papers neatly on the kitchen counter, placed his keys beside them, and walked out of the $7 million penthouse like a woman who had finally made peace with her decision. For 5 years, Nora Simms had been married to Reid Calloway, a billionaire CEO whose name could open any door in the city. Everyone thought Nora had won the greatest love story imaginable. The ordinary girl who married the billionaire. The woman who went from a small apartment and a simple life to living among luxury, private jets, and million-dollar views. But nobody knew what happened behind those mansion walls. Nobody saw the nights she waited alone for him to come home. Nobody saw how she slowly stopped laughing because the man she loved never noticed when she was hurting. Reid gave her everything money could buy. Everything except the one thing she wanted from him: his heart. He believed Nora would never leave. After all, what woman walks away from a billionaire? But Reid forgot something important. Nora never loved him because of his money. She loved the man she thought was underneath it. And when she finally walked away, Reid discovered the truth every powerful man fears. A woman who has nothing to lose is the one person money cannot control. Now the billionaire who could buy companies, private islands, and anything his heart desired was left standing in an empty penthouse, holding divorce papers from the only woman who ever loved him for free. And for the first time in his life, Reid Calloway had to fight for something money could never purchase: the woman who stopped waiting for him. The first time the world saw Nora Simms standing beside Reid Calloway, everyone assumed she was the luckiest woman alive. The newspapers called it the wedding of the year. The billionaire CEO of Calloway Holdings had finally settled down. The man who had been photographed with actresses, models, and women from every corner of high society had chosen one woman. But the cameras never captured what happened before the ceremony. They never saw the moment Reid first looked at Nora, not as a woman he loved, but as a surprise he never expected. Nora stood outside the small coffee shop where she worked, holding 2 cups of coffee in her hands, wearing a simple blue sweater and jeans. Her hair was slightly messy from the wind, and there was a small stain of coffee on her sleeve. She didn't notice. She was too busy smiling at the elderly customer she had just helped. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Wilson," she said warmly, "and don't forget your appointment next week." The old man smiled. "You remember everything, Nora." She laughed softly. "Someone has to." That was the kind of person she was. She remembered birthdays. She remembered people's favorite drinks. She remembered small details everyone else ignored. And that was exactly what caught Reid Calloway's attention. Not her beauty. Not at first. Her kindness. Reid had been standing near the entrance of the coffee shop, dressed in a custom black suit that probably cost more than the entire building. Everyone recognized him. Everyone except Nora. She walked past him without hesitation, without staring, without trying to impress him. And for some reason, that bothered him. Most people changed when Reid entered a room. They became nervous. They became careful. They became desperate to prove they belonged near him. Nora simply looked at him and said, "Excuse me, you're blocking the door." Reid actually paused. Nobody spoke to him that way. He looked at her for a moment, almost confused. "You know who I am," Nora glanced at him. Should I? For the first time in years, Reid Calloway didn't have an answer. A week later, he saw her again. Then again. And somehow, the woman who knew nothing about his wealth became the only person who didn't treat him like his money was the most important thing about him. But Reid was not used to needing anyone. He built his empire by trusting nobody. Love was something he considered a weakness. Until Nora smiled at him one evening and said, "You know, you don't always have to be the strongest person in the room." He looked at her like she had spoken another language. "I don't know how to be anything else." She smiled sadly. "That's what worries me." At the time, Reid didn't understand what she meant. He thought he was giving her a life she could only dream about. A mansion, a luxury car, a place beside the most powerful man in the city. He never considered that the woman standing beside him might want something money could never provide. To be seen, to be chosen, to be loved. Reid Calloway was not a man who waited. In business, hesitation cost money. In life, hesitation created weakness. That was why everyone around him was surprised when, after meeting Nora Simms at the restaurant, he kept thinking about her. Not because she impressed him with wealth, she had none. Not because she belonged to his world, she clearly didn't. It was because she looked at him without fear. That was rare. Most people knew Reid Calloway before they ever met him. They knew the billionaire, the CEO, the man whose name appeared on skyscrapers and business magazines. But Nora only knew the man sitting across from her. A quiet dinner conversation turned into something Reid never expected. She asked him questions no one else asked, not about his company, not about his money, not about his success. She asked, "Are you actually happy?" The question caught him off guard. Nobody spoke to Reid that way. He was used to people wanting something from him. Nora wasn't asking for anything, and that made him curious. Over the next few weeks, Reid continued seeing her, not with the usual games wealthy men played. No endless years of dating, no uncertainty, no pretending. One evening, while sitting across from her, Reid made his intentions clear. "I don't believe in wasting time," he told her. Nora looked at him, waiting. "I know what I want." She stayed quiet. "I want you." The words were simple, direct, completely Reid. Nora looked surprised. "Reid, we barely know each other." "I know enough." That's not how most people think about marriage. Most people spend years trying to decide what they already know. He leaned back, his confidence filling the room. "I have spent my entire life making decisions. This is one I'm sure about." Nora studied him. She knew he was intense. She knew he was different. But she also saw something beneath the arrogance. A man who had spent his entire life building everything alone. "What happens when you get tired of me?" she asked quietly. For a moment, Reid looked almost offended by the question. That won't happen. It was the kind of certainty only Reid Calloway could have. And Nora believed him, because at that moment, she had no reason not to. A short time later, the news shocked everyone. Reid Calloway was getting married. The billionaire known for keeping his personal life private was marrying a woman almost nobody in his circle knew. Nora Simms, a woman with no powerful family, no billionaire background, no social connections. People wondered what Reid saw in her. Some called it unexpected, some called it impossible. But when Nora walked down the aisle, even the people who doubted them had to admit one thing. They looked perfect. The wedding was everything people imagined a billionaire wedding would be. a beautiful venue, hundreds of guests, luxury everywhere. But what made people stare wasn't the money. It was Nora's happiness. She looked at Reid like she had found the person she would spend her life with. And Reid stood beside her like a man who had finally chosen something for himself instead of his empire. At that moment, nobody knew what was coming. Nobody knew that the same confidence that made Reid successful would one day make him blind. Nobody knew that the woman standing beside him would eventually become the woman walking away from him. Because love had brought them together. But pride would test everything they built. From the outside, Nora Simms had the life every woman dreamed about. After marrying Reid Calloway, her name appeared beside his everywhere. Magazines called them the perfect couple, the billionaire and the beautiful woman who changed him. People saw the luxury. They saw the penthouse overlooking the city. They saw the expensive cars waiting outside. They saw Nora wearing elegant dresses at events beside one of the most powerful men in the country. But they never saw what happened when the cameras disappeared. They never saw how quiet the apartment became. Reid was always busy. Meetings, business trips, late nights at the office. There was always something more important waiting for him. At first, Nora understood. She knew she had married a man with responsibilities. She knew Reid built an empire before she came into his life. So she tried to fit into his world. She learned his schedule. She waited for him. She prepared dinner even when she wasn't sure what time he would come home. One evening, she spent hours making his favorite meal. When Reid finally walked through the door, it was almost midnight. Nora looked up from the dining table. "I thought you would be home earlier." Reid removed his jacket and placed it on the chair. Something came up. She looked at the untouched food. "I made dinner." He glanced at the table. "You didn't have to do that." It was a simple sentence, but it hurt more than he realized, because Nora wasn't talking about the food. She was trying to create a moment with her husband, a moment he didn't even notice. She forced a smile. "It's okay, I'll warm it up." But Reid was already checking emails on his phone. That became their marriage. Nora reaching, Reid distracted. One day, Nora decided to make the penthouse feel less like a hotel and more like a home. She added small things, family photos, flowers, a few decorations she thought would make the space warmer. When Reid came home and noticed the changes, he stopped in the middle of the room. "What happened here?" Nora smiled. "I wanted it to feel more like us." Reid looked around. This apartment was designed for a reason. Her smile slowly faded. "I just thought it needed a little warmth." He shook his head. "Nora, this isn't a small apartment we're decorating together. This is my home." The words were not loud. He didn't yell. That almost made it worse, because Reid always spoke like his opinion was the final answer. Nora looked around the room, at the pictures she carefully placed, at the small pieces of herself she had added. Then she quietly started removing them. Reid didn't notice. That was the part that hurt the most. He didn't notice. Months passed, and Nora began realizing something painful. Reid was not a cruel man. He never cheated. He never raised his voice. He never intentionally tried to break her. But he had a way of making her feel invisible. At night, she would lie beside him and wait for him to turn toward her. Sometimes she reached for his hand. Sometimes she tried to start a conversation. But Reid was always somewhere else. One night, she finally asked the question she had been carrying for months. "Reid?" He looked up from his laptop. What? Are you happy? He stared at her. The question seemed strange to him. Why are you asking that? Because sometimes I feel like I'm the only person in this marriage. Reid sighed. Nora, you have everything you could ever want. She looked at him quietly. That's not what I asked. He didn't answer, and that silence told her more than words could, because Nora was beginning to understand something. She had married a billionaire who could give her the world, but she was starting to wonder if he would ever give her himself. A few months after the wedding, Reid invited Nora to one of the biggest charity galas in the city. It wasn't just another party. It was where billionaires, politicians, celebrities, and business leaders gathered every year. Everyone knew Reid Calloway. Very few knew his wife. As they walked into the ballroom, hundreds of cameras flashed in their direction. People whispered as Nora stepped out in a simple but elegant black gown. She looked beautiful, not because of diamonds or designer labels, but because she carried herself with quiet grace. For a moment, Reid looked at her and nodded. You look nice. It was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given her. Nora smiled, hoping the night would bring them closer. Instead, it became another memory she wished she could forget. Inside the ballroom, powerful men surrounded Reid within minutes. Executives shook his hand. Investors congratulated him on another successful year. Everyone wanted a few minutes of his time. Nora stood beside him, smiling politely, waiting for him to introduce her. He never did. Little by little, the crowd pulled him away until she was standing alone. She watched from across the room as Reid laughed with people she had never met. Not once did he look back to see if she was all right. An older woman eventually walked over and smiled. You must be one of the staff helping tonight. Nora blinked. No, I'm Reid's wife. The woman's smile disappeared. Oh, I'm sorry. The apology somehow hurt more than the mistake. A few minutes later, Reid finally returned. You disappeared, Nora said softly. I was networking. I was standing alone. He glanced around the room. You could have talked to someone. I didn't know anyone. He adjusted his cufflinks without looking at her. You'll have to get used to this world eventually. His words stayed with her for the rest of the night. On the drive home, the silence inside the car felt heavier than usual. The city lights reflected through the window as Nora stared outside. Finally, she spoke. Do you ever feel proud to have me beside you? Reid kept his eyes on the road. What kind of question is that? The kind that keeps me awake at night. He let out a quiet breath. Nora, not everything has to be emotional. She looked down at her hands. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was asking for too much. But deep inside, a small part of her heart had started to break. And Reid never even noticed. He thought he had given his wife a perfect life. He had no idea she was going to bed every night, wondering if the man she loved was slowly becoming a stranger. Time moved quickly. The little moments Nora once believed would get better slowly became a way of life. Reid was still the most admired billionaire in the city. His companies expanded. His fortune grew. His name appeared on television almost every week. Meanwhile, the woman waiting for him at home felt more alone than ever. Then their third wedding anniversary arrived. For Nora, it wasn't just another date on the calendar. It was another chance to believe their marriage could still become the love story she dreamed of. She spent the entire afternoon getting ready. She wore the same pair of earrings Reid had bought her before they got married. The only gift he had ever chosen himself. She even reserved a quiet Italian restaurant where they had shared one of their first dinners together. She wanted to remind him of the days before business meetings replaced conversations, before silence became normal. At exactly 7 o'clock, Nora was already waiting at the restaurant. A candle burned between the empty seats. Every time the door opened, she looked up with hope. It was never Reid. 7:30 became 8. 8 became 8:30. The waiter walked over with an apologetic smile. "Would you like to order while you wait?" Nora forced a smile. "I'll give him a few more minutes." She looked at her phone again. Nothing. Finally, she gathered the courage to call him. The phone rang twice before he answered. "I'm in the middle of something." Her voice was soft. "Reid, today is our anniversary." There was silence for a second. Then he answered calmly, "I know." She waited for him to say he was coming. Instead, he continued. "A meeting ran longer than expected. You promised you'd be here. I'll make it up to you." Nora closed her eyes. "You said that last year, too." On the other end, Reid sounded impatient. "Nora, I'm negotiating a $40 million acquisition tonight. This can't wait." She looked around the restaurant. Couples were laughing, holding hands, celebrating birthdays and anniversaries. No one noticed the woman sitting alone, trying not to cry. Her voice almost disappeared. "I wasn't asking you to choose between me and your company." "What are you asking then?" "I'm asking you to remember that you have a wife." The line went quiet. Then Reid simply said, "We'll talk when I get home." The call ended. Nora sat there for another few minutes, staring at the empty chair across from her. The candle had almost burned out. So had something inside her. She paid the bill herself and walked out into the cold night. When she reached the penthouse, the city lights were shining through the windows. The apartment looked as perfect as always. Expensive, elegant, empty. She stood in front of the mirror and slowly removed the earrings Reid had once given her. For the first time since their wedding, she wondered if she had fallen in love with the man Reid used to pretend to be. Or if she had simply loved the version of him she created in her own heart. She placed the earrings inside a small jewelry box and whispered to herself, "I don't think money is supposed to feel this lonely." And somewhere across the city, Reid Calloway was celebrating another successful business deal. Without realizing, he had just lost another piece of his marriage. After the anniversary, something inside Nora quietly changed. She still smiled when Reid came home. She still asked if he had eaten. She still folded his suits and waited for him at night. But the excitement was gone. She was no longer waiting for things to get better. She was simply surviving them. A few weeks later, Reid invited her to another corporate gathering. This time, it was an exclusive dinner, celebrating one of the biggest mergers in the company's history. The ballroom was filled with powerful people. Everyone wanted to shake Reid Calloway's hand. Everyone wanted a picture with the billionaire whose empire kept growing. Nora stood beside him, looking elegant in a deep burgundy dress she had carefully chosen herself. She wanted Reid to notice. She wanted him to look at her the way he once did. But he barely glanced in her direction before walking away to greet his guests. For almost an hour, Nora stood alone, politely smiling at strangers. Then a middle-aged businessman and his wife approached her. "You must be Mrs. Calloway," the woman said warmly. Nora nodded with a smile. The woman laughed softly. "You're beautiful. Reid is a lucky man." Before Nora could respond, Reid walked over. The businessman smiled at him. "You've done well for yourself, Reid. Your wife is lovely." Reid gave a short nod before replying with a careless laugh. She still has a lot to learn about this world. The couple laughed politely, but Nora didn't. Her smile disappeared. She stood there in silence while the conversation continued around her as if nothing had happened. For everyone else, it sounded like an innocent joke. For Nora, it felt like another reminder that she would never truly belong in his world. On the drive home, neither of them spoke. The silence filled every corner of the car. Finally, Nora broke it. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Reid kept his eyes on the road. "What now?" "You never realize when you're hurting me." He frowned. "I was joking." "I wasn't." The words hung between them. For the first time since they got married, Nora didn't try to explain herself. She simply looked out the window and watched the city lights pass by. When they reached the penthouse, Reid walked straight into his office to answer another business call. Nora stood alone in the living room. She looked around at the expensive furniture, the marble floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. It was everything she once dreamed of. Yet it had never felt less like home. She walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a small suitcase. She didn't pack it. She simply placed it on the floor and stared at it for a long time. Then she quietly pushed it back inside. She wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. But for the first time since becoming Mrs. Calloway, the thought crossed her mind. And once that thought entered her heart, it refused to leave. The distance between Reid and Nora was no longer hidden. Even the house staff noticed it. The once lively penthouse had become painfully quiet. Most nights, they ate in separate rooms. Some mornings, Reid left for work before Nora even woke up. And when he returned, she was already pretending to be asleep. Two people living under the same roof. Two strangers sharing the same last name. One Sunday afternoon, Nora decided she couldn't keep pretending anymore. If this marriage was going to survive, they had to talk. She prepared Reid's favorite coffee and waited for him on the balcony overlooking the city. When he walked outside, he looked surprised to see her sitting there. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Reid glanced at his watch. "I have a conference call in 20 minutes. It won't take long." Something in her voice made him sit down. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The wind moved gently across the balcony. The city below was alive with noise, but between them there was only silence. Nora finally looked at him. "Are you happy with this marriage?" Reid frowned. "Where is this coming from?" "It's a simple question." He leaned back in his chair. "I've given you everything, Nora." She nodded slowly. "I know. The house, the cars, the security, the vacations. You've never had to worry about anything." Another quiet nod. Then she looked into his eyes. "But I've worried about losing my husband every single day." Reid looked away. He didn't know how to answer that. For years, he had measured success by numbers, profit, growth, power. He had never learned how to measure love. Nora continued speaking before he could respond. "When we first met, you looked at me like I mattered." Her voice trembled. "Now you look through me." Reid sighed heavily. "You're overthinking things." That sentence shattered the little hope she still had. She laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, but because she finally understood. He truly didn't see it. He couldn't see the loneliness. He couldn't see the nights she cried herself to sleep. He couldn't see the woman slowly disappearing right in front of him. She stood up from her chair. "I don't need another apology, Reid." He looked confused. "I didn't apologize." "I know." She smiled sadly. "That's the problem." Without another word, she walked back inside the penthouse. Reid remained on the balcony, staring at the skyline. For a brief moment, something inside him whispered that he should follow her, that he should stop her, that he should tell her he loved her. Instead, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Another business call. He answered it without hesitation. Behind the closed bedroom door, Nora quietly opened a drawer and took out a large white envelope. She placed it on the bed and looked at it for a long time. Then she whispered to herself, "If he can't see my tears while I'm standing beside him, maybe he'll finally notice my absence." It was the first time she seriously thought about leaving, and deep down, she already knew the decision had been made. The next few days passed in complete silence. Neither of them mentioned the conversation on the balcony. Reid buried himself in work. Nora buried herself in disappointment. They lived under the same roof, but it felt like they existed in different worlds. One morning, Nora stood in front of the bedroom mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her smiled less than she used to. Her eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep, from years of hoping. She slowly walked through the penthouse, looking at every corner of the place she once dreamed of calling home. The grand staircase, the marble kitchen, the living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything looked perfect. Everything except the marriage inside it. She picked up a framed wedding photo from the shelf. In the picture, Reid was holding her hand while cameras flashed around them. She remembered how safe she felt that day. She remembered believing she would never have to face life alone again. A tear rolled down her cheek. She gently placed the picture back where it belonged. Then she walked into the closet and quietly packed a single suitcase. Not expensive handbags, not jewelry, not designer shoes. She packed old photographs, a sweater her mother gave her years ago, her nursing books, the simple things that reminded her who she was before she became Mrs. Calloway. She wasn't leaving with half of his fortune. She was leaving with the parts of herself she still had left. Downstairs, she placed a white envelope neatly on the kitchen counter. Inside were divorce papers already signed with her name. Beside them, she laid down the keys to the penthouse. No letter, no accusations, no goodbye. There was nothing left to explain. Before walking out, Nora stood in the middle of the house one last time. She whispered softly, "I loved you with everything I had." The empty room answered with silence. A few minutes later, the front door closed behind her. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with peace. Hours later, Reid returned home after another exhausting meeting. He loosened his tie as he walked inside, expecting another quiet evening. The house felt strangely different, too quiet. He called out her name. "Nora?" No answer. He walked into the kitchen and froze. The white envelope sat perfectly in the center of the counter. His heartbeat quickened. He picked it up. The moment he saw the words, "Petition for divorce," the color drained from his face. For the first time in years, Reid Calloway couldn't think. He looked around the penthouse. The flowers Nora used to water were gone. The little book she left on the coffee table had disappeared. The blanket she always folded over the couch was missing. Only then did he realize she hadn't left in anger. She had planned this, quietly, patiently, for a very long time. He grabbed his phone and called her. The call rang, then went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. The billionaire who could reach presidents, CEOs, and world leaders with one phone call suddenly couldn't reach the one person who mattered. Reid slowly sank into a chair, still holding the divorce papers in his trembling hands. The penthouse had never been so silent, and for the first time since building his empire, Reid Calloway understood what it truly meant to lose something money could never replace: his wife. For the next 24 hours, Reid Calloway refused to believe Nora was really gone. He called her again and again. Each call ended the same way: voicemail. He sent messages that were never answered. He contacted her friends. No one had seen her. Or maybe they simply refused to tell him where she was. For the first time in his life, Reid felt powerless. Board meetings no longer mattered. The billion-dollar merger waiting for his signature no longer mattered. His assistant knocked on his office door 3 times that morning. "Sir, everyone is waiting for you." Reid didn't even look up. "Cancel it." The assistant stood there in shock. In 10 years, Reid Calloway had never canceled an important meeting. But today, the billionaire couldn't focus on business. His mind kept returning to one question: how did I lose her? That evening, he walked back into the empty penthouse. The silence followed him from room to room. He opened the closet. Half of it was empty. Her favorite perfume was gone. The books she read before bed were gone. The little slippers she always left beside the bed were gone too. For years, Reid had walked past those things without noticing them. Now every missing item felt like another piece of his heart disappearing. He sat on the edge of the bed and buried his face in his hands. For the first time in years, the proud billionaire cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a man finally realizing he had spent years taking love for granted. That night, he called the only person who had ever challenged him. Marcus, his oldest friend, answered on the second ring. "You finally called." Reid's voice was barely steady. "She left." Marcus stayed silent for a moment. "I know." Reid looked confused. "You knew?" "Nora came to say goodbye a week ago." Those words hit Reid harder than any business loss he had ever experienced. "She planned this?" Marcus sighed. "She didn't wake up one morning and stop loving you, Reid." "Then why?" "Because she got tired of loving someone who never made her feel loved back." The room fell silent. Reid couldn't argue. He couldn't defend himself. Every memory came rushing back. The anniversary he missed, the dinners she ate alone, the nights she reached for him while he buried himself in work, the moments she looked at him hoping for affection and received nothing but indifference. Marcus spoke again. "Do you know the saddest part?" Reid didn't answer. "She defended you for years. When people asked why you were always absent, she defended you. When her mother worried about her, she defended you. When she cried herself to sleep, she still defended you." Marcus paused before adding quietly, "Until one day, she couldn't anymore." Reid closed his eyes. His pride had convinced him that Nora would never leave, that she would always wait, that she would always forgive him. Now the penthouse felt bigger than ever. Not because of its size, but because the only person who made it feel like home was no longer there. And for the first time in his life, Reid Calloway wasn't afraid of losing money. He was afraid that he had lost the only woman who had ever loved him before his billions. And deep inside, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. What if she never comes back? While Reid Calloway was sitting alone inside his empty penthouse, Nora was hundreds of miles away in the small neighborhood where she grew up. There were no luxury cars waiting outside, no private security, No marble floors or crystal chandeliers. Just a quiet little house filled with warmth. The moment June opened the front door and saw her daughter standing there with a suitcase, she didn't ask a single question. She simply wrapped her arms around her. And for the first time in years, Nora broke down. Not because she regretted leaving, but because she had spent so long pretending she was okay. That night, mother and daughter sat together in the kitchen drinking tea. Neither of them spoke much. Sometimes silence understands pain better than words. After a long while, June finally looked at her. "Are you sure about this?" Nora stared into her cup. "I waited 5 years for him to love me the way I loved him." June reached across the table and held her hand. "And now?" Nora smiled sadly. "Now I'm choosing myself." The following morning, Nora returned to the community clinic, where she used to volunteer before life became consumed by billionaire parties and endless business dinners. The nurses welcomed her with hugs. The doctors smiled when they saw her again. It felt like she had finally returned to a place where she belonged. As she spent the day helping patients, something inside her slowly began to heal. No expensive gift Reid had ever bought her had made her feel this peaceful. Late that afternoon, a little girl came into the clinic with a scraped knee after falling from her bicycle. Nora cleaned the wound gently while the child watched her. After a few moments, the little girl asked, "Are you sad?" Nora looked surprised. "Why would you ask that?" The little girl shrugged. "Because your smile is happy, but your eyes look like they've been crying." For a second, Nora couldn't speak. Then she smiled softly and finished placing the bandage. "I'm getting better." And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed it. Meanwhile, back in the city, Reid couldn't sleep. Every room in the penthouse reminded him of Nora. The kitchen where she waited for him. The balcony where she begged him to talk. The bedroom where she cried while he answered business calls. He walked through the empty apartment until sunrise, carrying memories he had ignored for years. The billionaire who had spent his entire life chasing success suddenly realized he had been chasing the wrong thing. For years, he thought money was security. Power was respect. Success was happiness. But none of those things could fill the silence Nora left behind. And as another lonely morning arrived, Reid finally admitted something to himself that his pride had refused to accept. He didn't miss having a wife. He missed Nora, the woman who loved him when he didn't know how to love himself. The woman he never thought would leave. The woman he now had no idea how to get back. Almost 3 months had passed since Nora walked out of Reid Calloway's life. The city had moved on. The newspapers had found new headlines. The business world kept turning. But inside the walls of the Calloway headquarters, something had changed. The billionaire everyone admired no longer looked like the man who once controlled every room he entered. One afternoon, Marcus walked into Reid's office without knocking. The moment he stepped inside, he stopped. For a few seconds, he simply stared. The man sitting behind the massive desk barely looked like his old friend. Reid's beard had grown uneven across his face. The perfectly tailored suits he once wore with confidence now looked wrinkled, as though he had slept in them. Dark circles surrounded his eyes from countless nights without rest. Stacks of business files covered his desk, but none of them had been opened. The coffee sitting beside him had gone cold hours ago. The office was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Marcus looked around before speaking. You look terrible. Reid slowly lifted his head. The confident billionaire who once intimidated entire boardrooms now looked like a man carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. He forced a weak smile. I deserve worse. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence between them felt uncomfortable. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. Finally, Marcus glanced toward the divorce papers lying on the corner of the desk. They were still there, untouched. The same papers Nora had left behind months ago. Marcus looked back at Reid. You still haven't signed them. Reid's eyes remained fixed on the papers. I can't. His voice was barely above a whisper. I pick up the pen every day. I tell myself today's the day. But my hand won't move. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired face. I spent my whole life believing I could solve every problem. I've bought companies. I've saved failing businesses. I've negotiated impossible deals. But I can't fix the one thing that actually mattered. Marcus watched him quietly. He had never seen Reid like this. This was the same man who once believed emotions were distractions. Now regret had become stronger than pride. After another long silence, Reid finally asked the question that had been living inside him for weeks. Have you heard from her? Marcus nodded once. I have. Reid immediately looked up. For the first time that day, there was life in his eyes. Is she okay? Marcus smiled faintly. She's better than you think. Those words somehow comforted Reid and broke him at the same time. He lowered his head again. I just want to see her. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He placed it gently on the desk. Reid unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was the address of a small community clinic. She volunteers there every Saturday. Reid stared at the paper for a long time. His thoughts drifted back to all the weekends Nora had begged him to spend with her. The weekends he chose work instead. The weekends he said he was too busy. The weekends he thought would always come again. He closed his eyes. They won't let me go back, will they? Marcus looked at his old friend with sympathy. You don't go there expecting her to come back. You go there because she deserves the apology you should have given years ago. Reid slowly nodded. For the first time in months, he stood up from his chair with purpose. Not to close another business deal, not to make another billion, but to face the woman whose heart he had broken. And somewhere deep inside, he already knew the hardest part wasn't finding Nora. It was accepting that he might have found her too late. Reid sat in his car for several minutes before gathering the courage to step out. His heart pounded harder than it ever had in a boardroom. For years, he had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without fear. But walking toward the woman he loved felt impossible. The small community clinic was filled with life. Children laughed as they ran across the courtyard. Volunteers carried boxes of medical supplies inside. Patients sat outside waiting for their names to be called. It was a simple place. Nothing like the world Reid had spent his entire life building. Then he saw her. Nora was helping an elderly woman into a wheelchair, speaking to her with the same kindness that had first caught his attention years ago. She looked peaceful, not because life had become easy, but because she had finally stopped fighting for a love that was breaking her. When she turned and saw Reid standing a few feet away, she froze. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. The noise around them seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, and everything they had lost. Nora slowly walked toward him. Her expression was calm. There was no anger left in her eyes, only acceptance. Reid looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You look happy." Nora smiled softly. "I found peace." Those 4 words pierced his heart. He lowered his head. "I came to tell you that I was wrong." His voice trembled. "I spent years thinking money could replace time. I thought providing for you was the same as loving you. I thought you'd always stay." He looked into her eyes. "I was arrogant. I was selfish. And I didn't realize what I had until I lost it." A tear rolled down his face. "I know saying sorry won't change the past. But if I could live those 5 years again, I would choose you every single time." Nora listened quietly. When he finished speaking, she stepped a little closer. Then, for the first time in months, she gently held his hand. The touch lasted only a few seconds, but it said everything words couldn't. She looked at him with kindness. "I know you loved me, Reid." He looked up in surprise. "You do?" She nodded. "I always knew. The problem was never whether you loved me. It was whether you knew how to show it." Silence settled between them. Reid's eyes filled with hope. "So, can we try again?" Nora slowly let go of his hand. The hope on his face faded before she even answered. "I've forgiven you." She smiled through tears. "And I hope one day you forgive yourself too." Reid swallowed hard. "But I can't come back." He looked away, trying to hide the pain. "You don't love me anymore?" Nora took a deep breath. "I'll always care about you. But I can't return to the place where I slowly forgot my own worth. I fought for us until there was nothing left of me. Leaving was the first time I chose myself." She paused before continuing. "I don't hate you. I don't regret loving you. But some doors close so that hearts can finally heal." Neither of them spoke again. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the courtyard. Around them, life continued, as though nothing had happened. Reid reached into his jacket and pulled out the divorce papers. Without saying a word, he signed them. His hand shook as he wrote his name. When he finished, he folded the papers and handed them back to Nora. She accepted them quietly. No celebration. No dramatic goodbye. Just 2 people who once loved each other deeply, but had arrived at different destinations. As Reid turned and walked back toward his car, he stopped for one last look. Nora was already walking back into the clinic, back to the life she had rebuilt, back to the peace she had chosen. He smiled sadly. For the first time in his life, the billionaire understood that not every loss could be fixed with money, power, or regret. Some people come into your life to teach you how to love, and some leave to teach you what happens when you don't. Reid drove away alone. Nora walked back inside with a quiet heart, and somewhere between goodbye and forgiveness, they both finally found the freedom they had been searching for. The end. If this story touched your heart, let me ask you one question. Do you think Nora made the right decision by walking away, or should she have given Reid one more chance? Tell me your answer in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoy emotional billionaire love stories with unforgettable endings like this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. And before you go, I've put together a special ebook featuring 5 exclusive billionaire romance stories filled with love, heartbreak, betrayal, and second chances that you won't find on this channel. If you're looking for your next emotional read, be sure to check it out through the link in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.